The movie begins with a family man named Richard, his beautiful wife Brenda. They have 2 kids together. They've been married for 7 years. He has the perfect life. But it appears to be one problem. He's bored. There isn't any sexual activities in their life, and his wife isn't feeling that spark from him anymore. And this worries Richard. They both visit a therapist, but it appears they are not making any progress. Richard calls it a waste of time. Because the therapist isn't married and don't have kids, he doesn't see how she will help when she can't relate to this live experiences. He goes to catch a train to commute to work. After he gets a seat, he started noticing the women on the train becoming appealing to him. He couldn't help but gaze at every woman he set his eyes on. He even fantasized over the ladies, having weird imaginations of him being married to them and not getting starved any time he needs to get intimate. Anyway, the lack of intimacy in his life seems to be getting on his mind. He arrives at work and goes to his office, gets settled in with the job he has pending on his table. It gets to lunchtime, then George, a colleague of his, who they relate well with each other, comes into Richard's office and asks him for them to go grab lunch together. But Richard doesn't like the crowd at lunchtime. He prefers to go at 2 when everyone has settled in their different corners. Then he can decide to eat or go shopping or just clear his head. At his preferred time, he takes a walk to a nearby shop to look around if something could catch his attention. Several sales representative tries to woo him over with their product, but he simply passes. He wasn't interested. Probably the sales representative were not appealing. He was looking at a green sleeve shirt when a sales representative walks up to him with an introduction and be of service. This time, the sales representative was an attractive lady. Richard tells the lady he needs a blue sleeve, but she convinces him to try this green one instead. He doesn't like it, but because he starts gazing over her, it's worth a try. He just lets her walk in front of him while he admires the way she walks to the closet. He tries the shirt on while having second thoughts about the color and his preference for blue. The sales rep quickly calls her assistance before he has any chance of changing his mind. The next day, on his way to work, at the office elevator, his secretary called that someone is waiting to see him. She's waiting at the reception. He asked the secretary if it was a client. She said she isn't sure, but she's comfortably waiting for him. So Richard became nervous. He was astounded when he saw a dashing lady. He then recognized her. Nikki. He hasn't seen her in 8 years. He was his best friend's girl. He complimented her and was surprised to why would she come visit him at his office. She said she was in the neighborhood and she heard he works in this building. So she said she should stop by since it's been years they last saw each other. She was looking around his office, then realized that Richard is married with children. While Richard had to handling some official assignment, she was surprised that he isn't the kind of man she knew 8 years ago. She tries to break him if he's happily married, which Richard says he is. She feels he's only saying that because he wants to portray himself as a happy married man with kids. She expects him to say such things. Nikki decided to be honest and come clean on why she came to see Richard. Richard confirms his suspicion and he's relieved by hearing this. She says she needs a reference for a job she's applying for. She needs Richard to help her out. Richard is willing to help. He was about telling her what he needs immediately. She bring a paper and pen for Richard to sign. He wished her luck on the interview and hoped they could see again sometime while she lives. Richard is at work the next day trying to land a big account for his firm. He is on a call with the client when his secretary tells him that Nikki is on the other line. They start talking on phone. She says she called to appreciate him for the help he offered regarding the job, which she got. That she wants to take him for lunch as for an appreciation for his help. Richard says he doesn't do lunch at regular time. She says she will wait. After all, she's still on bed and it will take an hour before she will get ready. Richard's still unwilling because his day is really busy. She insists and tells him as long he has to eat lunch that day, they should meet up. He then agrees. At the restaurant, the waitstaff politely tell Nikki that the restaurant don't allow smoking. She drops the cigarette and uses her heels to put the cigarette out. Richard couldn't take his eyes off as he gazed through her legs while she talks about the guy she's seeing. They both catch up. Then he asks Richard how he met his wife. If he's still attracted to his wife since they have 2 kids together, she also asks him if he still get intimate with her. Richard tells her it's none of her business. They both smile about the question. Then Richard decides to tell her how he met his wife. It was a beautiful story, and Nikki confirms it too and finally agrees with him that he loves his wife truly. Though Richard says he's bored, but it's part of marriage, she smiled and asked him for them to meet again. Richard thinks so too. Richard and his wife are off work. Richard likes to stay at home. Unfortunately, that's the day his wife loves to shop at Manhattan. The family is at a shop where Richard is trying to encourage her to get sexy underwears, but his wife prefers the bigger ones. Richard refers to them as grandma panties. Richard is shocked for a moment in seeing Nikki at the shop, but he composed himself and introduced her to his wife and kids. Richard tries to recall his wife that Nikki used to date his best friend Nelson back then. His wife recalls. She compliments her and the kids and lives to go continue shopping. They both look at her when she steps down to continue shopping. But Richard was really cautious. He obviously doesn't want to get into any trouble. Richard tries to have the last glance of Nikki without his wife noticing, but their eyes met and he smiles while walking. The affair starts becoming too frequent. Everyone seems to be observing Richard at the office. Just then he gets to the office, greeted by his secretary and her assistant, and they pass the message. Nikki called, and she's on her way to meet him at the office. Meanwhile, Richard was on the phone with his wife. Nikki walks in lighting her cigarette. Richard had to excuse himself from the call. Then Nikki bought box of gifts for his kids. Richard is thankful and noticed the gifts are expensive, but tells Nikki she didn't need to do all of it. She goes and seats by the window and asks Richard if he has some money on him. Richard has quite some amount in his wallet, so she takes all of it. She starts throwing them out of the window. They watch how passerby struggle to get 1 or 2 from the money thrown on the ground, which later turns out to be fun for both of them. Nikki appears to be succeeding in her plans to get all Richard's attention. Richard can also feel it, but he feels a bit disappointed with himself because it's going to affect his marriage and wants to be a better person. In order for him to get a hold of himself, he decides to take his wife out for dinner to get the sting of another woman off him. He goes to dinner with his wife and their friends, who is also a married couple. They get chilling and catching up about their families. When a waitress comes to their table to ask if they need anything, she gets the attention from Richard. This time, Richard doesn't take it lightly. He's making an effort to be a better person, but it seems the temptations won't stop coming. He excuses himself from the table and go confront her boss, expressing how he feels and asks to change the server to the old man at the end of the room, in addition, handing him a tip for the trouble. After some weeks trying to stay clear of Nikki, she isn't backing down, and Richard can't have self-control when it comes to her. He was in an important meeting when she called. He had to excuse himself out to take the call. He appears to enjoy her company. She calls and pleads for him to accompany her to get her things from her ex-boyfriend's house the next day, since he isn't at the apartment for some time now. She was being so persuasive, so Richard agrees, thinking it's less than an hour trip the next day since he grants her such favor in the past. The following day comes, and he received a shocker to find out they are taking a flight to DC, Washington, another state, during working hours. Richard couldn't believe the steps he's taking. He was furious, but him back on the trip. She assures him it's going to be quick, just get her things and leaves. He keeps getting a call from George to remind him of the meeting they have by 3 p.m. He keeps making excuses. He begs George to keep covering up for him, hoping he can get back on time for the meeting. It's a very serious business they have been working on for months. They get to the apartment, a lot of police at the neighborhood, but Nikki assures him that it's normal with the premises. They gets to the floor, opens the apartment, immediately get to it. Richard waits for her while he pack her things. She decides to change clothes also, while Richard look around to keep himself busy. Richard was looking at some old school books which reveal some of her past in school. They overheard a familiar music and they rhymed to the song together. Just then, her ex-boyfriend walks in, seeing both of them reminiscing together. Just the look on his face was so scary, though he had other thoughts about them, but was calm, asking Nikki why she brought another man to his home. Richard tries to clear himself of any situation which provokes him. Richard got the beating he didn't bargain for. It took the help of the police to rescue him. The police surely was his angel at that point. Things were getting from bad to worse for Richard. There was a storm. Nikki couldn't stop but keeps being sorry, but Richard's irritated. The rain kept pouring, which caused the flight back to the office to be cancelled. Nikki tried kissing him if it could make him calm his nerves. It just made the situation worse. Richard is in a race against time to get back to the office. It's past 3 and the clients are seated waiting for Richard to deliver his proposal. Richard at this point had no other option but to tell George and the office he can't make it early. The boss begs for 30 more minutes from the clients, while George goes to place a call again, trying to see if they could work something out. Richard knows it's impossible. George tells Richard he hopes she's worth it and then hangs up. The clients couldn't have it anymore. They have better things to do with their time. They had to live. Richard had what I would describe as a walk of shame to the office the next day. Not too long. His boss comes to his office and asks him to come with him to the meeting room. He commends Richards for the works he has brought to the firm, but compares him to a penny, which is his worth to the company. The penny has a value compared to the whole table, which is far more than his penny's worth. The boss gave it to him straight. Richard, you are on probation. If this attitude happens again, you will be fired. Before he leaves, he said to Richard, more as an advice, you will lose a lot of money chasing women, but you will never lose women chasing money. Those words stroke me, raw truth. Richards has learnt the hard way. When Nikki calls, he rejects them. She also calls the office. He instructs the secretary to inform her that he isn't around. Every day she keeps calling, but Richard isn't interested with more drama in his life. He's more committed in giving all his attention to his family. He goes into a shop during his break. He sees Nelson, the ex-boyfriend to Nikki and his best friend. They are happy seeing each other after some years apart. Due to different line of occupation they have, they chat and catch up. He said he saw Nikki 2 weeks ago. This made Richard short of words to respond in. The way he explains how charming she looks and he confesses his desires for her, but he won't go down that road again. The breakup cost him a lot. He was depressed. Her charisma made Richard start thinking about her all over again, including all the good time they had with each other. He gets to the office. His secretary delivers the necessities to him. Then he asks if Nikki called. She say no. He starts doing things Nikki loves to do when they are together, like throwing a dollar bill off the window. He's left the office to meet Nikki at where she works. They take a walk outside her office. While they're having a discussion, they had an argument. She keeps asking Richard while he is still married to his wife, since he doesn't have intimacy with his wife. Richard somehow comes back to his senses and move on with his normal life day by day, telling Nikki not to contact him. His friend George offered him a ride to the station. In the process, they chat about how Richard has been taking life without the interference of Nikki. George, who happens to play a substitute role as a therapist in his life, gave him an advice to take his wife out on a personal date, get a babysitter for one night. Then he can convince his wife with some good night activities. Plus, he giving Richard an enhancement drugs just to have more pleasure. Richard did exactly as George advised. Things are going as planned. He sent the babysitter home. He checked on the kids, then was going to have an amazing time with his wife. He quickly takes the pill George gave him earlier. Out of excitement, he rushed to the bedroom to meet his wife. To his displeasure, he sees his wife has dozed off. Disappointed, but he tries to read some papers while he tries to sleep. 4 hours passed and the pill he took has manifested in a bad way. He quickly calls George and explains the situation, but George brushes it off. His wife walks in at their conversation, but she thinks her husband is talking to a lady. Richard quickly explained everything to his wife. She thinks it's very serious, then calls the family doctor. Richard is surprised that his act is about to land him at the hospital. He was admitted immediately. After the horrible experience, Richard moved past all his adventures he has been through and focused on spending more time with his family. He's finally proven to himself that family is everything. He also delighted and gives himself all the credit because he didn't have any marital affairs. He's at the office delegating work to his secretary, telling her to skip lunch break for today and order instead. Then Nikki shows up. Again. She just walked back into his mind, rent-free on his head. How could he tell her to live? Richard was defenseless. Of course, they had to seat out at a nearby spot. It's been a while. She tells him she's now engaged. She also shows him the ring, telling him she's getting married some months' time. Richard is happy for her, but was surprised that someone like Nikki would want to settle down. She says she's getting old. She realized she needs a man in her life. She can't live the club life anymore. She even pays the bills before they live. This feels like good news for Richard. He shares the good news to his wife about Nikki getting married while having fun with his children. He loves playing with his daughter a lot. They still attend their scheduled session with their therapist. It's already been paid for. She's happy they have made progress as they are full of energy. The therapist asked about how they are physically. Richard's wife says they are getting along, that being physical isn't important for them at the moment. Richard support his wife and say there are other ways to express love to one another. Richard is introduced to Sean, Nikki's to-be husband. Sean is a successful realtor, but they couldn't chat for long because he has an appointment he had to attend. He head out as Nikki and Richard seats at a bar where they chat for a while. Richard start asking weird question about Shaw, asking her if she really wants to do this. He also asks her if she loves him. Nikki is baffled but express how she feels for Richard, wishing they could have a life together since they make themselves happy. She tells Richard that Sean is traveling the next day. She will be joining him 2 days after. She wants him to come over a day before she leaves. Richard is hesitant, but Nikki says she will forward the address to him and wait for him by 2. The next day, Richard can't but think about what Nikki says. It plays on his head at work the next day as the clock ticks towards 2 p.m. Then he goes to see Nikki at the address. Seems this is it for Richard, as he pulls out his wedding ring from his hand into his pocket. He enters into the beautiful apartment and calls out her name in search for her. She responds so he can locate her. He was dumbstruck when he saw her. She tries to get Richard tempted by all means. She wants Richards to crave for her. She kisses him and asks if he likes it, telling him to come to the bedroom, asking him if he doesn't mind her keeping her shoes on. They were unto the action. In his head, this sin has already been done, but he gets to a position which always does when having fun with his kids, which kills the excitement in him, made him realize the mistake he was about to make, and he might regret for the rest of his life. He get to his senses as he peter out. This somehow gets him to keep thinking of how he could make his marriage work as it used to before they started having kids. Then he put his ring back on. He went home swiftly to meet his wife. His wife was shocked to see him home early and was scared something had happened. They both get into an intense discussion, which led to Richard not holding back, same as his wife. The intense discussion ends with the couple finally getting physical.